thought it might be useful if I made a quick video on putting the Munsell chips into the pages in the student book for a couple of reasons which I'll go into as I'm doing it. So what I have here on my palette is the second edition of the Munsell book. Now this is really important, okay? I've got the second edition here, which is an old one. Do not buy the latest edition, the fourth edition. As I make this video, we're on the fourth edition of the Munsell student set. And a lot of the people that I work with that do my colour courses who've got the fourth edition have had a lot of problems with the chips. They get stuck together, the little colour chips this is that come with the book. They get stuck together, and as you try and peel them apart, the paint comes off them. They also give you an inconsistent number of chips relative to the places that you've got to put them on the colour pages, which I'll show you in a minute. If you're going to get the Munsell student book, and I think it's a really good idea, don't get the fourth edition, get a second-hand second or third edition, and you'll be fine, okay? Not the fourth one. So the one I've got here, this is the second edition, really old, well-used edition. And it starts off this book with these pages of colour chips, and the colour chips come separately in a little plastic wallet like this, and little bags inside them with the chips inside. And what you do is you go through each page. The first thing that you do, I recommend this on my course, and this is what the book recommends as well, is you go through and you, one by one, you go to these pages and you put all the chips in place. Now, each one of these little plastic wallets holds a bunch of chips that are all of a single hue. Now, just quickly, I'll go over this really quickly again. In Munsell, there are three aspects of colour. There's value, which is from dark to light. There's chroma, which is from close to grey to intense colour. And then there's hue, whether it's blue, yellow, orange, or magenta. So where this is represented on these pages is the value goes the same from dark to light, and the chroma goes the same from close to grey to intense colour, but the hue is the same. All of these chips are the same hue, and this is interesting because this page here is 5YR. YR stands for yellow red, okay? Orange to most of us. And an awful lot of things in the world fit somewhere very close to this hue. Human flesh, Caucasian flesh, is somewhere around here, around value 6, chroma 4, closer to grey than you might think, value 7, chroma 4, depending on obviously what nationality you are. My kids are mixed, and their local skin colour is kind of somewhere around here. My wife is somewhere around here. I'm somewhere up here, and the kids are in between. But we're all basically different shades of YR, or very closely related hues to it. So this is, you can see this one has been pretty well used. This is a useful bunch of colours. But what's interesting about this is down here, the colours you have here, you'd call them brown, but they're actually orange. And it really helps you if you can be clear about the hues that you're using. Another interesting point about this, as soon as you start to work with these, is you see that different hues reach their highest chroma at different values. So yellow is quite light. It reaches its highest chroma at quite a light value. Orange, a little bit lower value, highest chroma. Red reaches its highest chroma at a lower value still. Green, yellow, still quite high because it's close to yellow. So each of these colours reaches its highest chroma at a different value range, and they all reach different levels of chroma too. So as you can see, I've done a bunch of these ones already. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to take one of the ones I haven't done, blue-green, and I'm going to show you how I would go about putting in the chips, okay? And the reason I think this is such a useful exercise is because it starts you thinking about hue, value and chroma without even getting any paints out. It starts to change the way that you think about colour. So if I get my little packet of blue-green chips out of here, here we go. get them out the little wallet. And it's just like a little booklet, like this. Now, what I've put down here is a neutral grey piece of paper. I've painted this a Munsell neutral. And if you have the student book, you can do the same. From your value scale here, you can match one of these. I'm about here, about value 6. And paint a piece of card or something. A nice neutral, and it makes it much easier to judge the colours of the chips. Now you might think this seems like a really easy exercise to do. And if you do think that, it can only be because you haven't tried to do it yet, because it's actually pretty tricky. So let's get them all out first. And you can see hopefully they're all different values, and they're all different chromas, but they're all the same hue. So where I would start with this is organising them by value, just roughly to start with. Get the lighter ones at the top. We get the darker ones at the bottom. Just start organising them by value first. And I should point out that even I've been working with Munsell for a long time now, years, and I still find this tricky sometimes. So don't worry if you have a go at this and you find it kind of tricky. And now try and group them into values. I'd say they look to be about all the same value. It helps sometimes if you squint, because that tends to take away the chroma. For higher chroma colours, it's very difficult. It can be very difficult to judge the value correctly. They all look about the same value. They look about the same. These probably about the same value, I would think. And I would say those are the same value. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 groupings. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I've got 7 here. So there's just one, there's space for one chip there. You can see they mark them with a cross. Again, if you've got the 4th edition, I'm really sorry. I wish you'd seen this first and didn't buy it. But if you have, sometimes it gives you some extra ones, which makes this even more tricky. But since I can see that there's 7 rows in terms of value, and I've got 1 there, it gives me a clue that obviously this one is slightly lower value than those. Now I've got my 7 rows. So they're organised into value, okay, already here. Now the next thing I would do is get the ones that are closest to grey and put them on the left-hand side for each little lot of value, each little collection of values. Get the ones that are closest to grey. Okay, so now you have, this is chroma 2. See the 2 here, this is the chroma. All of these are chroma 2, but they're all different values. So that's that. And then I would put, now what the book recommends you do is that you then build out from there. But what I think is easier, gets you there quickest, if for each value row, you get the highest chroma one out. Just leave the ones in the middle anyway you like. Get the highest chroma one out, because then it's easiest to see the highest chroma. This row is easy, I've only got 2, and this one is easy, I've only got 2. I've got the highest chroma one there. I'll swap those around, and then you can start to judge. You're almost there at this point, really. You can start to judge which is, you've already got the value sorted, you can start to judge which is highest chroma. And I think probably that's about right. Check quickly that you've got the right number. 2 for this row, you can see the X here. 4, 4, 4, 3, 2 and 1. And I think I've probably got it about right. We can put them all over here now. And as you do this, immediately you're starting to think about colour differently. Ordinarily, when we think about colour as painters, we think about the stuff that's right in front of us, which is our tube paints, because that's what we deal with. We think about yellow ochre, cadmium yellow, burnt umber, even some more esoteric ones like Madder Lake, you know, Roman Earth, these incredible romantic names that paint manufacturers like to give their paints. Hopefully you've seen that one actually went really smoothly. They don't always go that smoothly. Hopefully you've seen there how I've got those organised. And I think those names for the tube paints that we tend to work with, they really don't help us, because you tend to get fixated on those names and to forget that all they are is colours. They're the raw materials that you use to mix all the colours that you need. And you'll find that much easier if you think about colour in terms of hue, value and chroma than if you think about tube paint names. And once you've got to this stage, what I'd recommend you do is stick them down. Now, some people stick them with glue. I wouldn't do that because they're really useful to be able to get out and use, to hold against stuff, to judge values and chromas of the things that you see, especially locals. You could use glue dots, but in my experience, they lose their sticky after a while. So what I do is get a tiny little bit of blue tack like this, which I just pulled off here. Just a tiny bit on the back, and stick it in. And then you can take it out anytime you want and put it back anytime you want. Because these chips really come into their own when you start using them to judge the colours that you see. And you can do that using a colour isolator or just holding them against stuff. And if you've done a couple of these pages already, or when you try to do this, if you find this difficult at first, and it can be difficult, it will begin to show you how complicated the job is that we have as painters, what a complicated job our brains have to do when they're trying to transfer the colour that we see with all of its problems of simultaneous contrast and values that make it difficult to judge. Then mix those colours, and mix them right, potentially with different light on the palette than we have on the painting surface and than we have on the subject, and then paint with them. You know, it's a complicated process, but it doesn't have to be as difficult as some people make it, I think. And the best place to start, I think, is by stopping thinking about tube pigment colours and start thinking about hue, value and chroma. It's going to make it easier for you to mix colours. If your colour isn't right, first ask yourself if the value is right. If the value is not the one you want, then change the value. Then ask yourself if the hue is right. If the hue isn't right, then you can change the hue. You can do these things individually, and that's one of the big advantages of Munsell, is that it shows you very clearly colour in all of its three aspects separately, so you can change one at a time if you know what you're doing with the mixing. So hopefully that's been useful to show you an easy way to start putting these together. But let me show you something else quickly about tube paints. I've got three really common tube paints here that we tend to use a lot. Okay, I've got burnt umber, raw umber and yellow ochre, right? None of these names mean a thing to us as painters. They don't describe colour. Well, I guess you could say yellow kind of describes colour. But what's interesting about these, let's have a look at burnt umber. I'll stick a bit of all of them out on the palette and we can see what colour they are. There's burnt umber, this is raw umber, and this is yellow ochre. Now the interesting thing about these colours is, if we think about them as burnt umber, raw umber and yellow ochre, immediately it becomes more difficult to think about how you're going to use them in mixes. If you think about them in terms of the hue they are and the value they are first, it makes life much easier. So in Munsell terms, if we were thinking about these colours, this burnt umber is orange, all right? That's the most important thing to know about that colour. Here, this is a page from the big Munsell book, which shows you more colours. And this is 5YR, which is 5 just means it's in the middle between yellow and red. It's actually darker than this, but it's fairly close to, in hue terms, to 5YR. The value is slightly lower. So it's below a value 2. It's right down the bottom of the scale, this. But its hue is orange. So instead of thinking burnt umber in a mix, think low value, low chroma, orange. So if you want to take down the value of a colour and you want to swing its hue towards orange, that would probably be a good choice. Now, raw umber is actually much more yellow. This is another page from the Munsell Big Book. And this is 10YR, yellow red. So it's another orange, but it's more yellow orange. And down the bottom, this is a value 2. And that's very close in colour to the raw umber that I have. This is Michael Harding's paint, by the way. And also notice how, because this is tending more towards yellow, yellow achieves its highest chroma higher up the value range, which means we get lower chroma here. So in the yellows, it's very hard to get a higher chroma. So this raw umber is lower chroma than the burnt umber. So what I want to know about this colour is that it's low value, very low chroma, and it's an orange tending towards yellow. What about the yellow ochre? Same page. It's about there. Probably slightly more yellow in hue, but something like that. So these two are almost the same hue, which is really interesting, because I read a funny thing in a book the other day where an art critic, who after all is not a painter, was talking about the American tonalist painters and the difference in the colour they used. And he said the old masters, when they painted, what they used to do was they would take a colour, and then to darken it they would use white, and to lighten it they would use black. And actually that's a common misconception for beginner painters, think that you can do that. But you can't, because the black and the white change the hue. So if I want to mix a lighter version of this colour here, then I know that this is in the same hue range. So mixing between these is going to give me something which is in between in terms of value and of chroma, but is pretty much the same hue. And most objects in natural indoor light, from light to dark, from the light to the shadow, tend to keep a constant hue. They just change from light to shadow in value and chroma. And that's another reason that Munsell is so useful, but I'll go into that another time. So hopefully that's given you some pointers about how you can go about, if you've got yourself a copy of the Munsell student book, how you can go about putting those chips into the pages. And if you've got it, I recommend you do them all, because gradually it will start to change the way that your brain processes colour. When you look at colour, you will start to see value, hue and chroma, and I think it'll really help you. It will make your mixing easier, and it'll make your painting easier by extension as well. I hope that helped.